those were fun times when I think back of it, because it was all about the music. There was no money, so it had to be about the music.
It wasn't about, you know, selling units and all that horseshit. It was about passion.
That was the war cry. That was like, we're gonna burn our idols and we're gonna create something completely different, and you're gonna have to deal with it. So, cue.
It was very easy to just get raiding parties and going like killing posers and stuff, you know, not literally usually, but we'd pound on a few, you know, because they'd take our girlfriends.
There was so much testosterone going on.
I want to see a fucking mosh pit, New York style, right now! Come on!
We played shows in clubs where kids did stage dives and landed on their skulls and busted their skulls open. And an ambulance came and they took them off in a stretcher, but you know what? The show never stopped, and I didn't even know about it until after the show.
Everybody had a good time, even if they were bleeding. And I had a good time if they were bleeding.
It was a really exciting time, you know, because the energy produced some really amazing music.
A lot of the bands back in the day, you know, they were doing stuff that was absolutely brand new, and it was like...
They paved the way. No one thought about doing that stuff. They're geniuses, you know, for creating what they created, and, you know, totally paved the way for bands like us.
It was just a time where it was all new, and nobody knew what this was, but it was just about, God, this is great. You just knew it was great, and you had to do it, and you had to hear more of it. It was like a drug. It was like caffeine. It was like, God, I have to do more. I have to get more of it.
It was the touch of God, man. I mean, we're just like, I am seeing something that only a few people really understand, you know, because to a lot of other people it's just a show, but for us, man, it was basically bowing at the altar. It was just like, it was so huge, man.
I suppose thrash was born back in the early to mid 80s. Why did it come about? I think because, you know, growing up, I listened to stuff like Judas Priest and Black Sabbath, which I, you know, thought in terms of were metal. And then metal kind of got a new moniker, and it was more of, really what it was reinvented pop. And I think that it was almost an insult to a lot of us who grew up on Black Sabbath and Judas Priest and I suppose the later coming Iron Maiden, etc., etc. And we kind of took it to, let's say, that next level.
A lot of people thought that it was just too much. You know, it didn't sound like, you know, the music that we were playing didn't sound like, you know, Van Halen or Rush. You know, it was totally on the fringe.
I remember hating it first because I didn't know what to make of it. But about a week later, I was just completely sold on it, and it definitely changed my style in music from that point on.
It was different from everything else. And when you think about Metallica and Slayer, and actually, you know, Anthrax, how heavy they were, especially Metallica at the time, nobody played that heavy. Nowadays, it's like you turn on the radio and everybody sounds heavy, everybody sounds the same. But back then, nobody had heard anything like that. It was the heaviest, fastest, craziest music you could hear, and that was the birth of thrash metal.
When I was a kid, I started here, and I'm like, this ain't angry enough. I went to the next level. Got tired of that. This ain't angry enough. What can I get? Judas Priest. This ain't angry enough. I gotta go further than that. I found Venom and Motorhead, you know, and all the fast, aggressive stuff.
As far as always bringing up the energy level and things like that, and getting faster, which was the natural progression, bands like Iron Maiden, such talented players, we wanted to also show how we could play our instruments. It wasn't about just playing fast. It was about playing some good, talented parts.
You know, you had the new wave of British heavy metal. You had, you know, your gods like Priest and Maiden, and you had Motorhead, and we just took that, threw a little Discharge in,
a little exploited,
and there you have it.
The word thrash originally came from the hardcore scene. Hardcore bands were playing fast and metal bands got influenced by it, thus you have thrash metal.
The term thrash metal came about just because the crowd tend to thrash everything in their path, and it just kind of stuck. I've always been quite fond of the term myself.
When I first heard the word thrash, I thought somebody was referring to trash, and that it was an insult.
It's one of the names that when I heard it, I'm like, yeah, that's us. It's not like, it's like, well, we're not kind of like that. We're not kind of like this. When somebody said thrash, I'm like, that's a good name.
Well, when you think of thrash, there are certain areas of Europe that you could address and say that some of the stuff came from. But really, thrash, I think it's safe to say, was born in America.
Thrash really got started in 3 places. Los Angeles, we had formation of Metallica and Slayer. The Bay Area was Exodus, and then New York was Anthrax and Overkill. So those bands collectively made a huge impact and influenced everyone in their respective scenes to do their own thing and build and grow.
The scenes weren't really that different, you know. They were all centered around record stores that imported a lot of records, and about kind of, you know, word of mouth, grassroots movement, and tape trading.
Everybody was dubbing tapes off and sending them to their friends. You got to check this out. This is huge.
Promoting ourselves with cassettes, of course, that was it. You know, we were hoping to get a record deal for vinyl. That's awesome, vinyl. But cassettes we could make and copy the labels on a copy machine, and there were enough underground magazines and college radio disc jockeys to send us stuff to, so whatever it took, stuff had to go out.
By the time you got a copy of that demo, it was like the 14th generation of it. You could barely make it out, but man, you know, it was like it was that whole thing. It was like, hey, guess what? I got a demo you don't have. I'm super extra cool, but it was sort of like, it was the early version of the internet.
You know, these were guys that were just from the streets playing harder and faster than anybody, and I would have had to imagine that radio and things like that just weren't, they were probably running from that kind of stuff.
You know, mainstream was running from thrash, not only because of the heaviness of the music, but because of the nature of the lyrics. They were really provocative.
When we started out, we were kids wanting to sing about the heaviest things we can. So it was murder, Satan, rape, you know, violent death, you know, and of course the obligatory nuclear war song.
Lyrically, you went from bands who were influenced from by social stuff like us to just stuff like Exodus, where they would just talk about brutally killing people.
We want to write about the bad things in the world. And the thrash metal music gives us a chance to scream it out. We cannot change anything, but we can scream it out.
I ran a label back then, and it was really tough. It was tough getting distribution. It was tough getting your record played on the radio. It was tough getting it on the shelves of stores. Mainstream America was just afraid of it. They didn't know what to do with it.
You weren't expecting to hear them on the radio. You weren't expecting to see them on MTV. A lot of times you weren't even really expecting them to be able to put a record out, because especially in the early days you couldn't find a record label that was going to sign them.
The 2 big thrash labels in America were Megaforce and Metal Blade. Pretty much every country had one, but the 2 big American ones really launched all the commercial powerhouses.
You got John and Marsha Zazula out in Jersey doing Megaforce. You got Brian Slagle out in the Valley in LA doing Metal Blade.
Well, they were the people that actually put their money where their mouth is. Johnny and Marsha Zazula and Brian Slagle, and actually started record labels specifically to release these records.
Metal Blade came first. Brian Slagle in Los Angeles was a music trader turned record store clerk, radio DJ, label entrepreneur, and he did a regional compilation called Metal Massacre.
On Metal Massacre, the debut compilation, the last song was Metallica, Hit the Lights.
Well, Metallica first started out as just Lars and James. And they were basically just rehearsing in a garage someplace. And the first track that they ever recorded was on the Metal Massacre album. It's called Hit the Lights.
And really Metal Massacre was the first time a lot of people in America, and even a lot of people who would join other thrash bands, heard Metallica, and by extension thrash music in general.
At that time when we started doing what we're doing in 83, 84, there certainly weren't a lot of bands in America that were doing the type of stuff that we were doing.
The energy was there. The talent really wasn't, you know, for all the bands involved. You know, like Slayer was doing like some, you know, they were a crazy cover band called Dragon Slayer, and, you know, Dark Angel was really bad at the time too, you know, so, and then all of a sudden something just got cohesive, you know, like Metallica got good. Everybody said, well, look, we got to step our, you know, our act up.
We were all looking for the most extreme stuff, and back in the day, the most popular stuff was stuff like Merciful Fate, Venom, you know, Motorhead, and then this band came into town called Metallica. That was the sound that everyone was looking for, but no one could, you know, actually execute until Metallica came along and it kind of showed everyone how to do it.
Well, the classic early Metallica lineup that a lot of people think of is, of course, Lars, James, Cliff Burton, and Dave Mustaine, who went on to form Megadeth.
Metallica was like the rulers of the scene back then, not only because they were making great music, but mostly because when they came to the light, you know, the scene was totally altered by their comings and goings of people in the band and what they were doing or not.
They kind of affected every band that they touched. They moved up to San Francisco, got a record deal, swapped Kirk Hammett out from the huge local favorite band Exodus, sent Dave Mustaine spinning back to Los Angeles where he formed Megadeth and vowed his revenge on Metallica, and while recording their album in New York City, blew the minds of Anthrax.
Yeah, Metallica inspired Anthrax. We were like, holy shit, we saw those guys rehearse in the music building in Jamaica, and it was very intense.
You know, there are pockets of bands in LA and pockets of bands in New York that played heavy metal, you know, but it was Metallica that brought it up to the next level.
Here was this scene that was, if you listen to the rock and roll drum beats, were pretty tame, and then all of a sudden you hear this, and you're like, whoa, what is this new sound I must take in? And they were the first ones to do it.
Metallica was all about the brilliance of that crunchy fucking guitar before anyone else had it. They had it.
Thrash was an evolution. It wasn't created. I think Metallica, especially with Kill 'Em All, turned everyone's head.
The impact of Kill 'Em All, the very first album, just blew everybody away. It was just so far ahead of its time. It was the ultimate thrash album.
After Kill 'Em All came out, all the bands, the independent bands that got signed afterwards were just totally fast, you know? Just totally aggressive, just like going for it, you know, and trying to be as thrashy as possible.
Metallica helped define thrash metal. I mean, they were one of the first bands to blow up big with it, even when we didn't know how big they were going to get, you know, but with every record, they were just redefining their sound and redefining what was going to be the new trend in thrash metal.
They had all this amazing stuff going on, and it would be almost impossible to think what could stop that momentum. It would have to take something truly catastrophic.
In September of '86, Metallica probably received the biggest blow, probably still to this day in their career. I'm sure they would say that, with the death of their original bassist, Cliff Burton.
I was just about to go on KUSF, and I got a call, and it was KJ Doughton, their fan club guy, and he had just told me that Cliff Burton had died. They had a big accident in Sweden. And I went on the air, and I couldn't talk for a couple hours, and a lot of people had learned about it, and it impacted more people than any other event I can ever remember, because most people our age had never dealt with death, had never known anybody who died.
When you talked about Cliff Burton, this was a guy that had his feet firmly planted on the ground, and it didn't matter if his popularity and success was, to the moon. This guy was still going to be the same guy he was when I first met him in high school. And I think that's what he brought to Metallica, and it's sad that he's gone, because those kind of people are very far and few apart.
What he meant to Metallica was, it's even hard to put in words. I mean, what he meant to the whole metal movement in general, there's no one like him. I mean, from the way he attacked the bass, what he played, and how he played, and his presence on stage was just mind-blowing.
In a lot of heavy metal circles, Metallica is still really great, but I think they were pretty much at their greatest when they had Cliff Burton in the band. And myself, I miss the guy a lot. He was definitely a legend and a presence that will never be forgotten. Long live Cliff.
You saw them kind of gradually move away from thrash, and a lot of people feel that if Cliff had lived, that might not have been the case, and that he might have kept the band more pure to what they started out doing. But I don't know if that's so true. I mean, Metallica ended up becoming overall the biggest metal band really ever, one of them at least.
I think Metallica is the Black Sabbath of our generation, the Led Zeppelin of our generation. And I think, Metallica obviously, first 4 records, classic. First 5 records, classic.
They're the forefathers. We wouldn't be doing this without Metallica, without having heard Metallica. So they have, forever everyone's respect in metal for breaking through and doing what they did and helping totally define the genre.
Being kicked out of Metallica, a lot of people said, has fueled me to be faster and better in Megadeth, and that's kind of true, but I was better and faster than them when I was in Metallica.
When Dave Mustaine was kicked out of Metallica and replaced with Kirk Hammett from Exodus, it was a huge blow to him. Metallica were really a band where things were starting to happen, and Dave was such an instrumental part of their sound.
I always thought Dave was really the best songwriter out of Metallica, and to some degree still do. I think some of his stuff was quite obviously the classic stuff, the stuff that was memorable and the stuff that stayed. I think the shame of it all is that there just became too much bickering and it took us away from the focus on how talented the guy was.
Yeah, Megadeth, when they first came out too, he had something to prove after getting booted out of Metallica. There was a huge grudge there that's been pretty well documented.
Because of that kind of constant tension and wanting to prove something, Dave Mustaine ended up making music that was much more intricate than what Metallica was doing.
The rhythms he would write were mind-blowing. The rhythms were just kind of almost impressive as anyone's lead playing. That was the fastest shit going on at that time. Yep. That was before Slayer was going Mach 10. I mean, I'm sure the old amphetamines helped a little bit, but still, they were flying, bro.
So many of the bands at the time were really, they were starting out, but they were young kids and they were just learning and they were, doing good things. But Megadeth was really excellent musicians, and Dave went out of his way to find really good musicians to play with him.
They were always the band that you would look up to because they were such great musicians. It was always like, oh, Megadeth, man, oh, check this out. And I think they almost brought some kind of jazzy feeling to the Thrash thing.
They were almost like a jazz band playing metal. That's kind of like the vibe I got from them, because there was a lot of unexpected twists and turns on those first 2 records. So, and that just comes from Mustaine's kind of sideways brand of guitar playing, and that's what's always made him so original.
Back in the time, it was very influential to a lot of people playing guitar and trying to rip fast like that,
Megadeth changed my life, man. When I heard like Metallica was great and I was all about it, but as soon as I heard Peace Sells But Who's Buying, it was just over. I mean, that was like everything metal should be. It had the power, it had the speed, it had the riffs, it had the drums, it had the political lyrics. It was perfect. It really, like, it made me want to play metal. It still does.
Peace Sells is, that's a masterpiece. Yep. Front to back, it's just a great record.
For me, he really did set the scene for this thrash metal, and with his later albums was able to expand, you know, his popularity.
Really strange. When Terry was playing with Megadeth, I showed him a lot of my style. Terry's a good guitar player. For rhythm, he's great. In Metallica, I was the only guitar player, and a lot of that rubbed off on James. And in Megadeth, it was all my guitar playing and hired hands that learned what I was doing. So out of all of this, I mean, this is totally going to sound arrogant, and I'm sorry, but I'm just telling you the facts. I've affected 3 bands out of the big 5.
You have to give him credit, whether he played on Kill 'Em All or not. Dave started it. And then he went and did Megadeth, which is, you know, one of the greatest metal bands, you know, ever to strap on a guitar.
It would be fun to be able to look at what I did from above and see all of the people that I've affected. But, you know, I also know that these guys were all established now. They've developed their own style since then, and they're very successful.
All the music he wrote on Kill 'Em all those great Metallica songs, you know, without Mustaine, there is no Metallica. Without Mustaine, there maybe is no thrash metal at all.
The LA thrash scene was amazing just because there were so many great bands that were happening at the time. I mean, really, when you look back at what happened there, I mean, Metallica started in LA, Megadeth started in LA, Slayer started in LA, Suicidal started in LA, so many bands started in LA. Even though the mainstream media, and certainly when you look back at the LA scene in the time, everybody looks at Motley and Rat and that whole hair band scene that was going on there as the scene that was happening at the time in Los Angeles. But what people forget is that the LA thrash scene was really an amazing scene.
You know, in LA being the capital of glam, it was very easy to just get raiding parties and going like killing posers and stuff. Not literally usually, but we'd pound on a few, you know, because they'd take our girlfriends.
I mean, if you were into Motley Crue, Wasp, or Dokken, you were considered a poser, and that type of bands were not welcome in that scene. If you wore a Motley Crue shirt to an Exodus show, you would got your ass kicked, guaranteed.
I never understood why anybody would want to go see men dressed up like women. To this day, makeup, tight clothes, it's like, I didn't get it.
Girls got it.
And I don't get that.
Yeah, girls got it. They love seeing that. And like, okay.
Well, there definitely was a competition between the glam bands and the thrash bands, and I think that definitely made the thrash bands want to be heavier, want to be more extreme.
I'm glad that they had these glam hair bands back then, because they were, you know, it was like without heaven there's no hell, you know what I'm saying? Without glam, you know, thrash would have had a target.
Eventually, it became a little bit better in Los Angeles because, you know, when Slayer came in, they ushered in quite a few other bands in Los Angeles as well.
You had bands like Dark Angel and Hyrax and Agent Steel and kind of the second wave of LA thrash.
There was definitely an underlying scene there, and the interesting thing was it was happening much more in Orange County. The kids there were definitely a little more into the thrash stuff than they were in Hollywood.
We didn't want to be part of LA. That's why we stayed in Orange County. You know, we were a big-time Orange County band. We probably did 3 Hollywood shows in our existence.
To think of Slayer in Los Angeles when all this glam stuff was going on, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. And I think that that's the best way to define what Slayer was about.
When Slayer first started out, they actually were wearing makeup in the early days, probably one of the only thrash bands who really ever went that route.
We put makeup on like guys as opposed to putting on makeup like women.
Yeah, we were like the anti-Hollywood thing. That's what we always, in the beginning, that's what we wanted to be. We wanted to be anything that Hollywood wasn't.
Yeah, when they first came out, I was almost like actually kind of afraid to approach them because they just seemed so evil, and the makeup kind of made them look even eviler.
For me, when I first started going and seeing, I saw Slayer at the Keystone in Berkeley. It was my first thrash show. I didn't know what it was, you know. And I was standing up front, and they went on, and the pit exploded, and it was just like, oh, this is thrash.
I remember the first time seeing them live in '86, and I was literally scared to get near where the action was happening. I mean, I went to go see them in Wasp, but I'm like, I'm gonna get killed here.
Seeing Slayer in the Mall was probably one of the most religious shows I ever went to. It was the scariest place to be. I don't care who you were, and if you were Satan, you were scared. It was loud, it was heavy, it was amazing.
You can listen to the early Slayer records, you can listen to Hell Awaits, or you can listen to their very first album, or Chemical Warfare EP. And those are very good records, but the record that kind of changed me in so many ways was Slayer, Rain and Blood.
The best album for me, it's easy. It will be Rain and Blood, of course. I mean, it's the thrash Bible, I would say.
Dude, back in the day, if you put on Rain and Blood in a car with me and like my close friends, someone was going over the back seat into the and stage diving and KAOS.
Well, definitely when Rain and Blood came out, that changed everything. The thrash scene and Slayer definitely went from being an underground phenomenon to being something that was huge and mainstream. And that record, to this day, is still one of the best thrash records of all time. And Angel of Death is probably, I mean, considered certainly by me and I think everybody else, is one of the greatest heavy metal songs ever.
Angel of Death, the heaviest song of all frickin' time. Can I just say that? Insane, and I hate you for writing it, okay? Because I wanted to write it.
Angel of Death!
Angel of Death is the most horrifying lyrical song ever. You know, it's like everybody else stop writing. You know, you can't top that. That's the apex of you know, thrash lyrics or whatever, where it told a wicked story and it kept you completely engrossed, and you know, there's nobody could top that.
Angel of Death!
Slayer is it as far as a live performance. You cannot see a bad Slayer show. It does not exist. It doesn't happen. So if you end up opening for Slayer, you're pretty much screwed.
We got spit on the first
We got
night.
spit on, but I just opened my mouth and caught and said, yeah!
Trouble, opening for us. Chicago band, right? So in the Aragon Ballroom, Trouble goes on stage. The crowd's chanting Slayer louder than the PA. I was like, wow, this is so fucking cool. And the drummer kind of snapped and he didn't handle it right, and it just got kind of ugly.
Yeah! Slayer! Yeah! Slayer! Slayer! Slayer!
Arguably the heaviest band of all time, and Slayer has never teeter-tottered or faltered for a second. And the integrity they've shown over those years has put them in the position where they are, where people, they've set the standard on what is heavy.
Gods.
Yeah. Slayer are pretty much the still reigning kings of thrash.
I mean, you know, Slayer, they've influenced as many people or more as us in Metallica, you know.
Well, Slayer really, when you look back on it, was probably the biggest and most successful thrash band from the LA scene. Even though Metallica started in LA, I think most people look at them and they really had their success when they moved to San Francisco. And Slayer was a true and true LA band. They still live in LA. And once they came out, you know, they influenced so many other bands, and you had a lot of bands that, if it wasn't for Slayer, I don't think at the time in LA you would have seen any other thrash bands that were out there.
When people say, yeah, it started in LA, it really didn't start in LA. Metallica was kicked out of LA because they weren't understood, you know? I'm sure that after the fact, you know, it was really convenient for people to say, oh yeah, it started in LA, but no, it started in San Francisco.
Bay Area thrash scene, just basically because there were so many great bands coming out of here, and it was basically became labeled as thrash metal capital of the world.
There was definitely like something to be said about the new thing coming out of the Bay Area, because it was such the hot spot for thrash that you almost had to pay attention to whatever was coming out of San Francisco.
There was just like this total coming together of all these fans and bands coming out of the woodwork, and then there was the KUSF Rampage Radio, and then there was Metal Mania magazine, and this huge scene, this thrash scene, just exploded by 1983.
The Bay Area scene in 1983 was thriving. They had this show called Metal Mondays that was at the old Waldorf, and it was packed. I mean, on a Monday night.
It was amazing. I mean, there was a bunch of clubs to play at, a bunch of bands that were just breaking, and everyone would go to each other's shows, and it was a really exciting time to be around.
Ruthie's Inn started fucking having lots of shows on San Pablo there. That was the club where all Metallica guys used to go hang out.
That was like a big family there. Death Angel, Possessed, Legacy, Exodus.
Yeah, they used to have shows like Slayer, Exodus, and Possessed for $5, and it was like the most incredible scene ever.
Ruthie's always seemed to be packed, you know, and there was always a lot of bands that were playing there. A lot of underage bands would play there, you know, get paid with beer and whatnot.
We were going to Ruthie's Inn every weekend. You know, we would just drink kamikazes all night. People like Paul Bailoff would be out in the crowd bashing, you know, posers.
We came out and hung out with everybody. You would see at a Legacy show Gary and James and Kirk and Tom and everybody in the crowd.
What's funny is that after a show, everyone would just be hanging out, waiting to see where's the party going to be. And we would always wind up at the Metallica house after the shows at Ruthie's.
All the bands would go there, congregate there, and party. And Exodus lived down the street, and Blind Illusion lived down the street, Violence, all the bands lived nearby.
We just had a great scene here, and it was a total like a camaraderie and brotherhood kind of trip, you know?
The thing about the Bay Area fans, I think, was that they knew that they were in the heart of it. Because they felt and they knew that, you know, by reading heavy metal magazines and whatnot, that this was it and they were what made it.
The sound was there and the sound was understood, and it made all the difference in the world, you know, to us San Franciscans.
For me, the Bay Area scene, you have Metallica and Exodus, there, you know, a couple of other bands, and for me, I loved Exodus. I mean, Exodus was when we talk about thrash.
Exodus was so intense. The guitar work, the screaming, the yelling.
The best Bay Area bands back then was by far Exodus. There was Metallica, but Exodus to me was really the true force of what was going on.
I remember when we did the show, we did the shows with Exodus, right? You know, you hear about bands, but this was like actually experiencing Exodus. You know, it's like we got to play like these guys because they were just intense.
I want to see some fucking blood up on the stage. All right.
I still have not seen a show as intense as Exodus. When they played, when they said there's blood up on the stage, there was blood up on the stage. I mean, to me, you know, even Metallica, I mean, in some ways were influenced by Exodus. I mean, they even got Kirk, you know.
Well, Metallica found Kirk Hammett playing in Exodus, and Kirk was a co-founder of the band.
When Kirk left the band and joined Metallica, it freed me up to, like, you know, start taking the band in the direction where we are now, you know. So it was a good move for both of us. Better for him financially.
Exodus continued without me, and I really thought that, you know, their first album, Bonded by Blood, was just such a great, exuberant thrash metal album.
To me, Bonded by Blood was a really cool and different album at that time, and I loved riffing on it.
Exodus Bonded by Blood is the best thrash album of all time.
I put it in and it just blew me away. It was insane.
Just the raw power, Bonded by Blood by Exodus, with the alternate cover of the Siamese twin getting ripped in two.
while, Exodus were banned from every Bay Area club. They could not play in any club because, you know, every owners knew and promoters knew that the place would get just destroyed. So all they could do is just play like barbecue parties. We're like, oh, Exodus is playing at this barbecue, you know, backyard barbecue, and we'll all show up and watch them play.
You couldn't invite them to parties because they would tear down something, they would rip something, they would break things. They like breaking things and people.
The first time Slayer came up to the Bay Area, they played the Stone and Ruthie's, and after the first night, they said, go ahead, thrash the hotel. And they didn't even finish the word before we started just wrecking it. We made a new entrance into the bathroom. We tore a hole in the wall big enough to walk through, wrecked TV, spiked pizza to the ceiling, and then as soon as we got the word that the cops are on the way, we vanished like cockroaches when you hit the lights. It was killer.
They like to actually snort spit lines. That was like a big thing in their circle. So you just kind of like loogie right over there. Just, and I don't know, I guess it was a manly thing. So
these guys were wild and insane and needed to be caged, because when they were out, they were like, just, you know, they could go into a party and then it would just, by the end of the night, we'd be the last ones standing there drinking. And I remember Paul Bailoff, they had a dead mouse and he dropped it in the mouth of some girl that was passed out.
Paul Bailoff was, you know, the original singer of Exodus and definitely, you know, a larger-than-life character.
He used to do some pretty crazy things. At certain parties back in the day, he would have this thing called helicopter trout. And it was a pair of gardening shears that he had drawn teeth on, and when he saw like some poser that had like fringes on his jacket or whatever, he'd come up and cut the fucking guy's jacket up and stuff.
I think Bailoff had a lot, you know, he threw some ripping parties, and we took some people that go, you want to go to a party, man? And I'll take you to one, and you go there, you want to break somebody's house up, man, because it's okay, you know, and we'd go over there.
They look like this, actually.
Yeah.
Paul Bailoff, destroyer, lives, relationships, property, no job too big. He had that printed on a business card.
We used to call him like the John Belushi of Bay Area metal, because he was like just all, yeah, you know, like metal rules, and if you don't like it, die.
Yeah, metal rules, and if you don't like it, die.
It's like, my grandma can make more noise than this and she's dead.
Are you a bunch of whips? Scream your fucking arms out!
He wasn't the greatest singer, but I mean, it really didn't matter about that with him. It's just his like unconditional love for metal more than anybody I think I ever met.
Yeah! Fucking that out till you die!
Paul Bailoff would forget lyrics, he'd come in off time, but when he'd scream out, kill a poser, any posers at the show, they started sweating.
He was the heart, man. He was the heart of thrash. He was just, I mean, he was just a funny guy. I mean, I always had a good time with him.
Paul was metal through and through. He lived it, he loved it, he died loving it.
When Paul Bailoff left and Steve Seuss, or as we call him, Zetro, joined the band, there was plenty of reason for it. I mean, Exodus was a band that wanted to continue to work and go out and do tours, and they just weren't able to deal with Paul at the time because there's a lot of partying going on. I mean, if you knew Paul Bailoff, you knew that he liked to drink and he liked to do a few other things.
As great of a frontman as Bailoff was, they just didn't feel that he had vocally what they really needed to go to another level. So in came Zetro Sousa, who was found in Testament.
Those were big shoes to fill. I mean, we're talking about going in a legendary band that was huge in San Francisco, and he's the new kid. But I think he did a hell of a job. I mean, Zetro, to me, if anybody was going to replace Paul Bailoff, it should have been Zetro.
One thing I'll say about Exodus, after all this time, for the last 20+ years since their inception, throughout all the trials and tribulations, the drugs, the deaths, the member changes, the mainstay and focal point has been Gary Holt, guitar player. He's kept this band alive throughout everything. he has been not only influential as a guitar player, but the band as a whole, from Bonded by Blood on, is legendary. It's a goddamn classic.
What's a typical thrash kid like?
35 years old, 2 kids. That's the typical thrash kid. Hey, you listen to this, goddammit!
I think the thing that really separated fans of thrash metal as opposed to fans of other types of music was the fact that they really just lived and died for this stuff.
I live for thrash metal! No fucking buts about it, and I want to be in the video!
Watch out for the boss.
It doesn't need commercial music exposure to survive. You have the fans itself who keep it around, as well as the good record labels.
They're very loyal. They watch what you do. You don't get away with, like, you know, any bullshit or something. You know, you release a shitty record and they tell you, which can be pretty painful, but it's good.
Every band that came through town that was a thrash metal band, they'd be there, and they'd most likely know most of the other people in the crowd there. There was a sense of community that you maybe don't find as much nowadays.
I think if it's like a little brotherhood, a community, a certain camaraderie, knowing that, you know, not everybody out there is like you, and you take pride in that. You know, I walk down the street with the hair like this, you know, and people can judge me and think what they want. They can call me Howard Stern. I don't give a shit, you know, because I got metal in my blood, and that's all that fucking matters to me.
This is stuff that, you know, has either got to find you or you've got to find it. You've got to have it in your blood. You have to have it within you. That dark, fiery pit inside you, spilling through your veins, coming out through your pores. The good thing about this whole thrash thing is that you meet people in all different parts of the world who have something in common, you know, so you always have something to talk about right away.
I always think of the typical thrash fan as a tiny, teeny little part of Paul Bailoff. Just a massive energy, extreme, powerful, yelling, screaming. But intense and hardcore.
Thrash fucking metal! Overkill!
Thrash kids back in the day, kind of a lot of the same similar things that Maiden fans wore. It was the high top running shoes, which I had, very tight jeans, tighter the better.
Tight jeans, leather studs, long hair, it's gonna be all that.
You wear, of course, your fine rock shirt that could be a t-shirt, but it was more popular to have the 3/4 inch baseball sleeve shirt. Tour shirts are preferable with the name of your city on the back where the band played.
Tight blue jeans, the black t-shirt, the black leather jacket.
The color black is eternal and universal with metal. I mean, even if you were, you know, 1985, 1995, 2005, if you wore black, it's, you know, you'll always fit in.
Long hair, and usually white sneakers the jeans were kind of tucked into, and this was kind of our uniform. You could identify us anywhere. We didn't look very intelligent, but we we looked committed to something, or should have been committed to something.
But most important of all, and this is the ultimate accessory for a thrash metaler, is the jean jacket with the cut-off sleeves over top of the leather jacket with the patch on the back. Mine was Ride the Lightning, like this, Metallica Ride the Lightning, and then as many buttons as you could fit on the front, so you'd have all your buttons on there.
Yeah, the guys were pretty set in what they had to wear to go to a thrash show. I mean, it was like the understood uniform that the guys had to do. But with the girls, I mean, you always have to have a little skin out somewhere. That's key, so that the guys take care of you. Got to wear black, and then you just got to rock out, so you do okay.
No girl has a problem in a metal show.
Got about 10 guys that'll fuck anybody
exactly,
up.
I have like
That's
fucking all them guys.
I started listening to it when I was 11 years old, and I just liked it. I loved it from the very beginning, and here I am.
You know, the ongoing joke was, you know, what has 2,000 legs and 2 breasts, you know, an Overkill show in Germany. But that had changed over the years, and sure, there's been plenty of girls who've come to our shows.
Smart girls get off on all that testosterone. It's pretty heady stuff to be in the middle of a pit with all that smoke and smell and sweat.
Besides having my daughter, it was the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. Knowing these bands, being in that time with all these people was the most fun I ever had. It was just in my heart and soul. I loved it. and I couldn't explain it any other way.
It attracts all types of people, not just, you know, your typical long hair, muscle bound, cut off t-shirt freak, you know.
It's kind of transcended more than just thrash. You know, it's funny, you know, you're talking to somebody afterwards, and one's a college student, one's a high school student, one's a real estate agent, and in one case I met an attorney. You know, but one. But it's unique that it has a blend, like all kinds of music, I think.
Having a good time. Have a good time all night.
Thrash accoutrement would be the mullet and headbanging, and then if you're a little more adventurous, stage diving and getting in the pit and moshing.
Most of those bigger bands were separated from their audience because they were all playing bigger places, and we were at the club scene where you're on a stage a foot high, and it was easy to get up there and jump off, and they weren't part of that, so they didn't write their music for that.
The crowd doing this thing called thrashing.
That stage diving stuff.
Diving.
Yep. What the hell? Never saw anything like it and was immediately addicted to it.
Took headbanging to the next level.
We used to all just bang our heads so unbelievably hard, where the first 15, 20 rows of the real intense fans at any show, all you would see were heads going like jackhammers and hair flying all over the place.
There's no way that, we're going to let anybody walk out of any place that we play without a feeling of fulfillment and without their damn necks hurting.
You want to see some heads move and some people flying through the fucking air?
I like to be in the front row and headbang, but it got kind of hard because I had to keep ducking and making sure I didn't get kicked in the face by a stage diver.
The people here trying to be as cool as they can about people stage diving. Try to cooperate with the guys working the stage, okay?
People had never seen anything like that, so when you did play, the bouncers usually would shit their pants because they weren't used to seeing kids stage dive and, just the pit just going crazy, ape shit, kids beating the shit out of each other, but having a lot of fun doing it.
That's the one thing that people will always like when they think of this thrash. They'll think of kids beating the shit out of each other in the pit.
It was totally insane. Like if you went to a show, it was basically like going to a football game or a wrestling match because you knew you were going to be a part of the show.
Everybody had a good time, even if they were bleeding, and I had a good time if they were bleeding.
And we wrote knowing that it was just like people were going to go crazy at this part. You actually call it a mosh part. You couldn't wait till you got to that point of the song, and the fans couldn't wait because as soon as you would break into it, they would break into this, and the whole audience was going around, and it was a sight to see that it'll never happen for a first time again.
There was a difference between West Coast thrash and East Coast thrash, and the West Coast was more kind of combining the new wave of British heavy metal. It was heavier, it was faster. Anthrax and Nuclear Assault and MOD and SOD had more of a punk, hardcore edge.
New York was unique because it was never known as a big rock and roll town. This is where disco came from. But there was this huge hardcore underground, and there were huge heavy metal scenes, mostly in the outer boroughs and in the suburbs.
When you talk about the New York scene, mostly everybody's coming from Jersey or coming from Brooklyn, or coming from Queens. And especially Jersey. The Jersey crowd, the Jersey scene's always been huge. Bigger probably than even so New York, just because maybe it's more suburban. And suburban kids are smarter when it comes to heavy metal. They love their metal.
Down in Jersey, there was a group of metalheads called the Old Bridge Militia.
The Old Bridge Militia was just like a real tight group of people that just felt the music. It really was something that you felt in your heart and your whole body.
They were nothing more than just a bunch of guys who loved metal.
Fortunately, I had a house that was on 29 acres, and what really separated us was we had a place that we could bring the bands to, where they could hang out, play, rehearse.
It was the coolest thing because we went in there and there was food and there was kegs of beer and people were partying, and it was just such a great thing to be part of that scene because I felt like I'd arrived.
They had bands like Venom, Slayer, Metallica staying over their house, putting on concerts in their basement.
We stayed there for about a week or so because we had nothing to do, and he let us stay there.
We had no money.
Yeah, we had no money, and he was really cool.
They had a gig right in South River at this place, and the guy proofed them when they were going in. They weren't old enough to even drink, so they didn't even let them play that night. So Joe said, "Hell with that, you're still going to play. You come back to my house, we're going to hook up the equipment." Hooks it back up, we get a keg of beer, and there you go. You got it. Slayer did a show for us downstairs.
The 516 Club, I don't remember what night of the week it was, but they just would have like a metal night there with a DJ spinning obscure stuff.
I used to get all the new stuff from Johnny Z that came in. Any new metal that came in, he would give it to me and I played here, and the people would just commute through this town and come together for a metal night.
I remember the first time walking in there thinking, okay, you know, people were just kind of standing around and banging their heads. I understand that, you know, but when I actually saw people with fake guitars, like and playing air guitar, that I had never seen that. I was like, wow, these people are really into it.
Forget if you had a broken leg or something, you know, you come in crutches and you know,
If you had a crutch, forget it. You weren't going home with your crutch. Anything we could possibly find, and then after a while we got custom air guitars. We made them ourselves, and they had little knobs on them, and we'd have telephone cord for them.
I ain't proud of that.
We came out to the East Coast in March of 1983, and obviously there was a scene. You know, most of it was based around John and Marcia Zazula, Rock and Roll Heaven in New Jersey. There was obviously a bit of a kind of a grassroots thing happening over in at L'Amour's in both. There was one in Brooklyn and one in Queens.
If you're looking for a change in beat, take a walk down 62nd Street, where heavy metal lives. Welcome to L'Amour.
L'Amour in Brooklyn, New York was like the mecca for metalheads. It was a place you could go constantly. They actually took the time to constantly book metal bands into that room at a time when nobody was booking metal bands once a month.
L'Amour was like the first rock club to really take a chance on booking bands like us and really start building that scene. L'Amour started booking all the thrash bands and metal bands from other cities and other countries, so that really became the spot.
I'll be delivering pizzas in the early evening and selling weed and shit on the side and whatever else, and then I would come here and fill in on the quiet nights, do security, like, because you couldn't work security if everybody knows you, so I'd work, they would have me work on like fucking like the hair metal night, nobody knew me, you know, but I would tie back my ponytail and, you know, hopefully not have to get any brawls.
Hey, first of all, he's full of shit. He worked there for the pussy, that's it.
Well, this was the place.
L'Amour's was it, man. We all drove, and on the weekend, Friday, Saturday night, we drove to L'Amour's, got our cars broken into, robbed. They took the stereos out. It was great every weekend, like clockwork. We had to get new side windows, because that's where they broke the window to get into the car. My friend's car, his Camaro, was stolen. They actually took the whole car. And then you went in, saw some metal, came out, and you had to get a tow truck. It was great.
Yeah, I mean, I always remember hearing about all the classic shows, you know, bands like Overkill, Carnivore, Anthrax. Obviously, they were like the house band for a long time. Anthrax was part of the Big Four, meaning the biggest four thrash bands: Megadeth, Metallica, Slayer, and Anthrax.
Definitely a very influential band, great band. I mean, a band like Anthrax was so ahead of their time.
Anthrax, to us, all the guys in our bands, Anthrax was a huge inspiration.
You know, they're giants in this whole
they have
thing.
their own
And they
unique
brought
sound.
they brought the East Coast up to be on a par with the West. You know, you have to give them credit.
Anthrax was cool because they were totally different than you know, the other bands that were out there. They actually had singers, you know, singing over the heavy thrash stuff.
You know, Joey and Neil Turbin were more singers than, say, myself or Paul, or even Blitz were, you know, at those days, even Tom Araya. We sang more of a harsh thrash, heavy type style, and Joey actually sang, which I thought, you know, with the heavy rhythms sounded great. I thought they had a real good chemistry.
You had bands like Exodus and Slayer that were just, you know, I mean, just ripping it out. But these guys were like, hey, whatever happened to songs? Let's keep the songs going, you know? And that was a huge factor for me in developing what I do basically today.
Another thing that was cool about Anthrax is that they were definitely different as far as like their lyrical content. They weren't singing about like ripping corpses up or raping women or anything like that. They were, you know, pretty lighthearted with the way that they dressed and looked, and, you know, pretty much like, you know, guys next door just having fun with metal and doing their thing.
They really brought a lot of their love for comic books and Stephen King movies and that type of thing. They put all that into their lyrics.
That was their trip. You know, they're like, hey man, we're all just normal people, all just nice guys. But when I was an angry 19-year-old kid, I was like, come on now, we're all like ready to kill, come on, Jesus.
One listen to the music, their music was just as lethal really as any of those other bands out there.
Anthrax to me was a great fucking band. They were like badass thrash metal, really fucking hard.
Fistful of Metal was cool. Spreading the Disease was a good album, but Among the Living, I think, is their like sort of defining album.
Among the Living, Anthrax, so thrashy, so ultimately thrashy.
Among the Living is still probably my favorite thrash metal record of all time.
I remember listening to it and listening to Indians, and just the harmonies on that thing with those huge riffs. You're like, man, this is great, because it was thrash, but it was different.
The guitar tone itself, for me, defines thrash. Scott Ian's rhythm playing and Charlie's drumming.
Charlie's still one of my biggest influences in metal.
Charlie, you know, what more can be said about Charlie? He practically invented the blast beat.
When I listen back to some of our older records, I sometimes close my eyes and I'm like, what the hell was I thinking back then? I was playing at such a fast pace, I was like, holy shit. I just, you know, that was it at the time.
And Scott, you know, is one of the, I mean, he's a giant. He's one of the most crushing rhythm guitar players. He's an old friend. And he took that New York hardcore kind of thing and incorporated it and created a whole new, you know, sound. You know, Anthrax certainly never sounded like Exodus or Metallica or Slayer, you know.
And to me, like, Scott Ian and James Hetfield are like the best rhythm guitar players in metal there ever was, you know.
I think Anthrax also with like, you know, like using like the word mosh, it like started like the kind of like, you know, the pop culture kind of moshing in metal, you know, like caught in the mosh.
Mosh! 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 Mosh!
They were very interested in punk and hardcore, and they pushed the mosh pit in a lot of their videos and pushed a lot of New York hardcore. So in terms of history, they were very important in terms of getting people familiar with all this stuff.
They always tried to incorporate different styles into their music, and you know, later on in their career they sort of pioneered rap metal, but also, you know, with the crossover, adding elements of hardcore, they really, you know, were really at the top of that.
In the 80s, when all the hardcore bands started crossing over to sound more metal, and all the metal bands started crossing over to sound more hardcore, and the scene, it just changed, and new bands came out of that, which were already combining the two sounds.
That was an interesting time because you had the whole scene, the thrash and the punk scenes kind of merging together. Suicidal really was the first ones that kind of brought that out. Then you had DRI and Corrosion of Conformity came right after them. And it was a kind of a fresh take on it because you had a lot of metal kids and a lot of hardcore kids that were kind of separated, and the scenes were separated, but the music was very similar, the ideas were very similar.
It was at least a breath of fresh air as far as I was concerned, because it's like, you know, this isn't the only thing out there. There's this whole other scene called hardcore and punk that all these long-haired leather jacket kids, they really had no idea about.
Hardcore was the American response to punk. It was the kids from the suburbs weaned on punk who created their own movement. They liked punk, and they took parts of it, which was the aggression, the speed, the power, and discarded parts of it, which was kind of the arty side for a more hardcore approach. So that's why it was called hardcore punk.
I think it was like around 82 or 83 when I started wanting to go to see hardcore shows, and I was immediately warned, saying, well, you don't want to go to CBGB's on the Sunday because you have long hair and the skinheads will beat the crap out of you.
Sometimes the hardcore kids and the metal kids didn't quite get along as well as you would hope that they would, so there was definitely some violence.
In the early days when we used to have shows like that with different style bands, punk and metal bands, there was fights every day, every minute of the show.
It was just skins versus long hairs, man. And I was just on the back riding the fence, you know. I had a mullet, so, you know, I was in between.
So there were like a few fights, like every now and then. Well, there were a lot of fights. And then,
I mean, we played a show out here in LA in 1986 at the Olympic Auditorium where it was chaos. You had 3,000 people there, and it was either, you were either a skinhead, a punk, a suicidal, or a metalhead, and they all hated each other.
Everyone was just beating the hell out of each other. It just, for no reason, for no reason.
It had nothing to do with moshing or slam dancing. It was fights. It was packs of gangs chasing other people. It was unbelievable.
That was the craziest fucking show I think I ever seen in my life. There's actually 5 separate pits. I mean, we're talking huge fucking pits, man. I broke my leg. It was God. It was heavy. It was, I don't know, you had to have been there.
It was insanity until finally a full-scale brawl broke out on stage with us between a bunch of suicidals and a bunch of these like biker-looking guys, and we had to stop our show when someone got their head split open by the bottom of a mic stand.
I will never forget. There was a kid who went in through the front. He went in through the front door. He had his ticket. He had his friend with him. He came in intact. I saw the same kid go out that same door. Blood just all off the side of his head. He was beaten to a pulp, and I don't know if it was because he was wearing a Slayer shirt or if he had his hair long, but I'll never forget that image.
The hardcore guys didn't like the metal guys, thought they looked stupid, thought they didn't get it, and the metal guys didn't understand the nuances of the hardcore scene.
It was rough at first, you know. It was almost like maybe we shouldn't be doing this or whatever. Maybe
might not work.
Yeah. But eventually, you know, people started to get along and realized that it was stupid to fight over such minimal stuff like that, and it's a whole new scene nowadays.
It doesn't really so much exist anymore. You could go to a show, a band like Hatebreed now, which is a perfect example of what metal and hardcore crossover became, and you see metal kids and punk kids and skinheads all existing in the same place.
There was definitely a little more lines in the sand in those days when those shows first started happening, but you know, the influence it's had on music's been amazing.
Crossover definitely, I think, kind of gave a little more of a street feel to kind of the really precise kind of fantasy vibe that some thrash metal had. You know, it kind of brought it back down to earth a little bit too, which was cool. I think a lot of the musicians came out of a punk rock vibe, but became better as players. That just naturally led towards crossover, and that happens continuing the hardcore scene these days. Bands who started out really as simple, straight up old school hardcore bands start to improve as musicians, and suddenly they're playing more metal stuff because it's just a little more technical.
There are a lot of bands who took thrash and hardcore punk and they fused the two together, but clearly the biggest one was Suicidal Tendencies.
Probably one of the greatest bands to ever come out of California, I swear. They totally started out as this hardcore LA skateboard type of band, and then they kind of evolved into a metal band. You know, they totally crossed over. Mike Muir, best front man, the guy's just fucking got magic to him.
Suicidal is Mike Muir, and Mike Muir is Suicidal both ways. So he had a real strong vision of what he wanted to do, and he definitely came from, he came from the streets, and he came from, a little bit of a different background than some of the other kids did.
His voice is unmistakable. I mean, you hear it and you know it's him. He's one of a kind. Great front man, great moves, always had a cool look. I could never pull off the bandana, but I always liked, how he rocked it.
Rocky, their guitar player, was very much a metal type of guitar player, but then you have the singer Mike Muir, who's got all of the attitude and the in-your-face, fuck you, of a punk rock singer.
Rocky George was such a thrash metal guitar player. Like, no matter what Suicidal was doing and how punk they were or how funk they were getting, he always had a riff for you, always.
And Rocky being black, I mean, now you're throwing another component into it, into what, most metal music has traditionally been kind of a European, descent, which by its nature is, called white Caucasian type of music. So now you're throwing in an ethnicity to it, which is perfect coming from Los Angeles, where it's such a melting pot.
The Suicidal fans, like a lot of the other fans, were real hardcore, but they also added the element in of, there was definitely some gang stuff.
I actually remember seeing a news footage about Suicidal where they were banned from LA, and there was shows were being shut down, and gang affiliations and all like that. So they were always very intriguing to me. I always felt like they brought a real sort of street level attitude.
And they were like one of the first DIY bands, do it yourself. They toured, they went on the road, they set up their own shows, they booked their own venues.
The first hardcore band to have a hit record was Suicidal Tendencies. Institutionalized was on MTV. It was a big seller. It was a really important record, and that's a really important band.
And that first Suicidal album is such a classic to me, and it still holds up today because those songs are like pop songs. They wrote pop songs, but in a really, really aggressive style.
I'm not crazy, here's the design. You're the one that's crazy, here's the design. You're trying to be crazy, here's the design.
What 16-year-old angry punk rocker metal kid did not know the lyrics to Institutionalized?
Okay, I'm just thinking, why don't you give me a Pepsi? She goes, no, you're on drugs. I go, Mom, I'm okay.
When their video Institutionalized hit MTV, I mean, we were all like, all I wanted was a Pepsi.
I go, Mom, just give me a Pepsi, please. All I want is a Pepsi. And she wouldn't give it to me. All I wanted was a Pepsi. Just one Pepsi.
It just fit right in, once the metal kids started discovering Suicidal, and then Suicidal actually then really kind of crossed over eventually and became more strictly a metal band.
I'm not crazy. Here's the design. You're the one that's crazy. Here's the design. You got to be crazy. Here's the design. They dig in and it's just to say what the only person you can eat from the trap to take it from the enemy myself. Doesn't matter. I'll probably get hit by a car anyway.
Thrash bands really weren't selling a lot of records, so if you were a member of a band like this, you had to get used to being away from home a lot, because your bread and butter and where thrash really came alive was on the road, and that's how so much of this stuff broke. Touring was just essential.
No radio stations would play the crazy music that we were playing. So you'd go on the road, travel to any city that would have you, and play for all the headbangers.
We were getting worked so hard. And if you're just playing guitar or you're just playing bass, it's a lot easier than playing guitar and singing. I was getting ridden hard and put away wet every night. It was just destroying band morale.
There was always plenty of excess. If you wanted whatever kind of drugs or whatever kind of alcohol, it was there. And you couldn't really be doing that stuff every night because you had to play shows. And when you were playing this kind of music, playing that fast and that hard every night, a lot of guys after a while got either sick or had to quit or leave the bands.
Once I got out and did what I had worked so hard for, I realized that I just didn't want to be involved in touring and that lifestyle. It's nothing that any specific event triggered. I didn't like the road at all, and I wanted to have a family.
You go on the road for 3 months, you come home, you find a job. 2 months later, you go back on the road for 3 months. You come home, your employer's first question is, well, where'd you work last? Oh, I worked here. How long were you there? 2 months. It's not exactly a glowing thing on your resume that somebody wants to hire you.
A lot of us as musicians, being as young as we were, got disillusioned by the business, thinking that, you know, you've got those dreams of being the rock star on the big stage playing Madison Square Garden and whatnot, and here you are 3 years later and you're still touring in a camper, and you know, you're still not making money. It hasn't gotten any better.
The same thing happened with just about every other band in that scene at the time. Over-touring, overplaying, going out, limited marketplaces. You go into a venue, you're told one thing, you get another. I played at a place in Milwaukee one time, and the guy brought us dinner, and it was fucking Dinty Moore beef stew. I'm sorry you have to beep that, but it was pathetic.
You're really like living hand to mouth on the road. It just becomes to the point, like, why are you still doing this? It's like your heart has been bruised so many times that you're just not into it anymore.
But it was hard on all of us. I mean, even some of those bands now, a lot of those guys aren't in those bands anymore because either they're gone, they passed away, or they just couldn't handle the lifestyle anymore. A lot of guys ended up quitting. But the ones that last are the few and the proud.
I mean, you know, it does, you know, pay my bills, you know, and I have very few job skills whatsoever outside of playing guitar, so I have to, like, do what I do best. But, you know, every moment you have where you're, like, a little, like, you know, oh, I'm a little homesick, okay, well, then there's, you know, 100 moments that are, like, you know, just priceless fun.
I know it from the bus. I know from living on the bus. I know living in parking lots. I remember sitting with Dee Dee, you know, a few years back, going, "Geez, I'm a 36-year-old man who lives in parking lots. This is fucking awesome."
It's comic book life. I mean, it is such an improbable way to make a living. Not that it's a living, but it's such an improbable job to have.
Yeah, the road definitely is not for everyone. You know, having done over 1,000 shows in the last 4 years, I can say that you got to be cut out for it.
Yeah, you gotta wonder if, you know, the early deaths, the trips to rehab, and all these things, did the road have anything to do with this? Yeah, probably. Being on the road all the time, trying to be able to sell albums, which is what they had to do.
There are definitely some major casualties, and you look at Cliff Burton, which immediately comes to mind, and the bus accident.
You had Death Angel, who were in a horrible accident. Those poor guys, some of them were seriously injured.
It was horrendous, basically. You know, Andy got really badly injured, and you know, I got slightly injured. It's pretty much the worst day of my life. So I just, you know,
it led to the end of our band.
Absolutely.
Paul Bailoff of Exodus died of a stroke, which a lot of people contributed to his lifestyle.
Bobby Blitz had a stroke on stage. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of crazy things that can happen to you on the road.
You know, we think our youth is timeless, but quite obviously stuff happens to us as we do get older, myself included.
These are all people that have lived the life, and the life is grueling, because as big as thrash ever got, it was never to the point where these bands had handlers and were being carted around and staying in spas.
Ultimately, you pay the sacrifices being on the road. If you really want to be successful, you've got to be willing to do anything. Unfortunately, the anything that we were willing to do wasn't enough.
I mean, the thrash movement in general in the United States was quite large, and the buzz was undeniable. But then when you'd fly overseas and play there, it's another story entirely.
We could not believe the reaction that we had when we first went to Europe. I knew there was a big thrash following, but not like this. Everyone was totally raging. The back rows were just as intense as the front. The Europeans, I think, were just so psyched to have entertainers from America coming there to play. You were like accepted sight unseen. The American fans were more judgmental when seeing you for the first time. You had to prove yourself. The only attitude those kids had was a good one. You could do no wrong in Europe, especially in Germany.
Not putting down America, because we're an American band and I'm very proud of the heavy metal scene in America, but Germany is definitely one of the greatest heavy metal countries in the world. The shows are really big. The fans are completely diehard. If you're a thrash metal fan, that's actually somewhere you should go because Germany kicks ass. I mean, you just have to see it to believe it.
Oh, we figured only in the States they would know all about stage diving and having a pit going and everything, but over there they can compete with anything that they have here, anything. I mean, some of it was even better, definitely.
There was a huge scene in Germany, naturally born out of the scene that was born in the States.
In Germany there was a big underground scene, and a lot started with tape trading of American bands like, you know, Exodus, Metallica.
It was for a while, it was for like a family kind of thing. You know, all the bands would get together, party, and, you know, have kind of hang out at each other's rehearsal rooms.
It was more beer drinking than rehearsing, you know. And in the summer we had a lot of parties.
The way the Germans did it was they were 16, they drank a lot of beer, and they played as fast as they could. Sometimes they kind of went off the tracks a little bit.
Yeah, it's a big difference if you listen to Exodus or Slayer or Sodom and Creator, you know. Because I think Sodom and Creator, they have an own style because they're coming from Germany.
The German thrash scene, the vocals were more guttural, a lot of screaming.
And they brought that.
Sometimes it was the broken the broken English that it didn't matter. All that you needed was guitars, screaming, shouting vocals, and loud amplifiers. To me, that was the most important part of what attracted me to the German bands.
When I started listening to thrash, it was mostly like Creator and Sodom, the German stuff.
In the German thrash scene, you had three big groups: Sodom and Destruction and Creator. But Creator were the band. They were the Metallica, in my opinion, of the thrash metal scene in Germany.
Creator was cool. You know, Creator's like, you know, the Pleasure to Kill album was a classic in its own right just because when it came out, it kind of like exploded in Europe, which made, like, you know, they were the most aggressive band around.
Creator's great. Definitely one of those, you know, European bands that I always think of when, you know, when I'm looking back. I mean, I just, you know, Pleasure to Kill.
Pleasure to Kill, the best fucking album.
Creator, I mean, in my opinion, their second album, Pleasure to Kill, was probably the heaviest, thrashingest album ever recorded. I used to play a game where I'd play albums I thought were heavy side by side, song for song, on fastest and heaviest, and Creator were the undisputed champs. They beat everybody.
Creator was also one of the first bands that really got into the halftime stuff, the really, you know, crushing metallic breakdowns. I like, you know, Millie's Attack.
I think Creator's mainly the reason why I sing the way I do with the screaming vocals, like the way Miller did.
They did something a little bit different, though. They were a lot more political than most thrash metal bands really tried to go. I mean, if you listen to their lyrics, you'll learn that that band really had something to say.
Creator, along with the other German bands, really helped jumpstart the thrash movement, not only coming out of Germany, but being so influential to a lot of the thrash fans, you know, in a worldwide setting. I mean, countries that you wouldn't even expect thrash was coming from, you know, Switzerland.
There's two big Swiss bands I really like myself, and it's Celtic Frost, of course, and Corona. Yeah, good bands.
In my opinion, Celtic Frost is the most influential one of them all. And they're still important to me. I can still go back and listen to the old Celtic Frost stuff.
But they definitely introduced some elements you hadn't heard at that point, you know, like having female vocals. Always respected them for being like some sort of avant-garde or whatever.
Canada may not be the first place you think of when you think of thrash metal, but they actually had a really cool scene, and some great bands like Voivod who are one of the most experimental of the thrash bands.
Voivod, probably one of the most technically proficient thrash bands I've ever heard, you know, and willing to do anything, you know, just all over the map.
I loved Voivod. They were off the chain, you know, it was so brutal, so raw, and still like innovative, you know. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for those guys.
Brazil is really most known for being the home of Sepultura.
Sepultura was a band that nobody thought was going to make it, you know, from Brazil. They came out and they were like, we can throw down just as hard as any of you guys.
Literally, they changed, like, you know, the way people played it. I mean, especially KSAD, everybody was coming out, you know, sounding like Sepultura. I mean, I wouldn't be a singer of a band if it wasn't for that record.
They definitely actually helped a lot too, because they brought another element to the scene, and they were really proud of where they were from. And I think that was, you know, a lot of people respected that they were so proud to be from Brazil and playing thrash metal.
Mortal Sin, you know, from Australia. I mean, Australia.
Yeah, by the start of the 90s, there were thrash bands popping up in almost every country. There were thrash scenes everywhere. And there was this mega tour that started out in Europe, and then it made its way over to the US, and that was Clash of the Titans.
I went to Clash of the Titans. That was the first real thrash show. So that was Alice in Chains opening, Slayer, Megadeth, and Anthrax.
Clash of the Titans, Slayer, Megadeth, and Anthrax. That particular show, I think, was just, for my first concert, you know, anyone that was there can tell you, it was just amazing.
I think that Clash of the Titans was so significant because it showed that thrash. It was the first time, and really one of the few times, that thrash emerged from the underground and really was a huge thing, and really almost, could you almost say, mainstream it became. It really almost did.
You know, I think you could look into a lot of different reasons why it got so big, but I think the reason is that the quality was there, was always there, and just people never understood it before, and they just finally understood how great it was, and the masses latched onto it.
Those bands were selling records, playing large venues,
all on major labels.
Tours, major labels. You know, that was definitely the first time it reared its head to that level.
The Clash of the Titans tour was the culmination of almost an entire decade of this whole movement just growing and bubbling, because, you know, here we were out playing, you know, to sold out amphitheaters and arenas.
That whole tour was just phenomenal. It just packed and sold out every night, and all about that music. It's all about the heaviness of thrash, metal, all that.
When we did Clash of the Titans, which was Anthrax, Slayer, Megadeth, and we took Alice in Chains, which at the time was an unknown band.
The ironic thing about Alice in Chains being on the Clash of the Titans show was that they actually weren't supposed to be on there. They were on there as a byproduct of the fact that Death Angel, another thrash band from the Bay Area, couldn't, because they had had a really you know, life-threatening bus accident.
We were offered that tour, but that was post the accident, and we just couldn't do it and didn't do it, and then so they got Alice in Chains to do that, and then Alice in Chains was on the bill, and that kind of threw a lot of people for a loop because no one had heard of them, and they weren't a thrash band.
And they were out there opening for 15,000 Anthrax, Slayer, and Megadeth fans who were just not having Alice in Chains at all.
I remember gallon bottles of piss being thrown at them.
Pelting them every night with crap, and those guys, man, I'll tell you, they were the most professional band I've ever seen. I mean, just dealing with that, never letting it get to them.
Lane, man, he came in and put it in their face. If people, I mean, people would throw stuff, and Lane would go in the audience and kick the fuck out of that guy who threw something. It was the most amazing thing, because the guy didn't take shit. He believed in what he did, and I love that, man. I'll never forget that. That is true metal.
And of course, 6 months later, man, and the box broke, and everyone who was throwing beer cups at them went out and bought the record. So, you know, Alice, they got their revenge.
It began the beginning of them and somewhat the end of the era of the thrash scene.
What Woodstock did as an end of an era, the Clash of the Titans could have been the big show that was the end of that era.
I think that was the end of thrash, that tour. I think that was it. I think it closed the door and said that's it, because after that tour, Nirvana happened.
Nirvana hit it big, and no one wanted to sign any thrash bands. They scouring the streets of Seattle.
By the time Clash of the Titans was over, thrash metal had been around, you know, about 8 years or so. You know, well, really 10, I guess, if you consider where Motorhead started, and
And so it was, it was going to be time for some cultural change, and that's just the way that it is.
There were a lot of bands at that time, and people were looking for something new. And then grunge was coming in, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, all that stuff was coming in.
Grunge was the only thing that could be cool. God forbid you had a guitar solo. God forbid you had any sort of look, and it was just a blanket squashing of all sorts of rock, hard rock, metal.
I always found with those grunge characters, they were so close-minded. They were so close-minded, and still look to this day. Did you ever see those bands ever repaying the favor? Once they got big, they never took out metal bands, ever. Alice in Chains never took out metal bands opening for them. Soundgarden, forget it.
I don't know, I think maybe as far as like thrash bands taking out bands of that type and not getting it back in return, maybe we were just more open-minded musically than people gave us credit for,
And I don't think we were afraid at that time to take anybody out or do anything. At that time we figured, well, we're the most extreme music here. How, who cares what happens from here on out?
It was the worst time for metal bands, 93, 4, 5, 6. Because of that grunge scene, and it's like the media just did everything they could to try and finally kill off heavy metal.
There was no support from the media whatsoever. The only thing that was left was the magazines, the metal magazines. Even those, in Germany, Metal Hammer all of a sudden turned into hard rock and Metal Hammer, it's very bad.
Like whereas in the 80s, a whole bunch of bands were able to break through and make it and have success, in the 90s, one. Pantera.
During the era when you could not buy a metal record almost, or couldn't go see a metal show, and it was all about the post-Nirvana, like, grunge movement or whatever, you could still see Pantera, you could still buy a Pantera record and get thrash metal.
They showed that people still wanted to hear heavy stuff because they were going platinum at a time when you couldn't say metal. There was no metal being exposed anywhere. Metal was supposedly dead. And
metal was Nirvana.
Yeah, and they're topping the Billboard charts and going platinum.
When it became very obvious and very clear that there was just a handful of bands that were going to be delivering heavy music anymore, people clung pretty tightly to us.
Phil and Selma just joined their band, and they were coming out of this kind of their Van Halen club band, guitar shredder thing that Daryl was doing.
We had a guitar hero who is still a guitar hero to this day. Insanely tight, unique rhythm section. The lead singer with no guitar binding him down, just freestyle lead singing.
They were really morphing into what Metallica was doing and what the thrash metal thing that was going on at the time.
They were heavy, they were thrash, they were metal. They came across as it, they projected off the stage that vibe of, we're going to stomp your face in if you get too close.
Totally influenced by Slayer and Venom and Possessed and Metallica and all those type of bands, and they really flew the flag for thrash metal throughout the 90s.
By the early 90s, they put out Cowboys from Hell and the Vulgar Display of Power, and then they picked up and clearly led the charge.
You put in Vulgar Display, actually you can put in Cowboys from Hell, and it's just like, you listen to that record and you're like, wow. It just like strikes me every time I listen to it.
They made metal cool again. So why
they did. And they brought the groove, which was something that was going on in the hardcore scene at the time, but most metal wasn't grooving like that, and they just brought that groove to metal, and that changed the whole game, which is still felt today. I mean, most metal has groove.
You couldn't help but bob your head to some of the riffs. they You're were like, they oh had- my god, it's they so had great heavy. groove in their music, and I think Amazing that's what made them a musicians. good band.
They're such an obvious band. It's like Metallica, They've done so much shit, sold so many albums, and done so much good for metal. It's pointless to even point out anything more. It's like they were the shit when they came out. That's it.
Grunge totally killed the hair bands. Didn't kill us, it just gave us a setback. And then after that, the Limp Bizkit type of music came out.
Nu metal, a lot of times, is considered, you know, the rap, rock fusion of the past few years, you know, as well as, you know, someone with a DJ, turntablist in the band.
What do you guys think of the new stuff that's out now, some of the newer bands? You think any of the new stuff?
Not the new metal shit, but, you know, some of the other... What do you mean, fake metal, rap metal? Yeah, rap metal sucks shit!
If it wasn't for thrash metal, there wouldn't be nu metal, even though I hate to say that because I am definitely one of those people that feels the same way as all the true metal heads do feel, that nu metal's not real metal, it's new metal.
I mean, you'll never find a thrash fan that doesn't like Priest and Iron Maiden and stuff. They want to hear guitar solos. They want to hear, you know, epic stuff, you know, instead of just tuning as low as you can and going da 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 da.
A few years ago, they started up with the whole rap metal fusion thing, and that became nu metal, N-U metal. And that's a whole different thing than nu metal, N-E-W. Nu metal.
Bands that now aren't being tagged with the nu metal category, these bands are being considered like they come from more the school of where we came from.
I love Chimera, I love Killswitch Engage, and In Flames. To me, it's kind of like a souped up Iron Maiden, but awesome.
Slipknot's a good band too. I mean, they get mostly kind of categorized in the new metal thing, but I think them and like System of a Down are certainly miles away from Limp Bizkit. Even I can tell that.
When I listen to Lamb of God or Shadows Fall, and I even put System of a Down, although obviously much bigger, huge band, but that record Toxicity straight up is a thrash metal record. So I put them in that category too, of just bands that love the scene in the 80s and grew up on that scene in the 80s and were able to take it and not just copy what was done in the 80s, but turned it into their own sound.
As Shadows Fall, us, Killswitch, Soilwork, Chimera, we are influenced by that time, but try to incorporate our ideas, of course, to not be a cover band. We want to, and I mean, bring the whole genre forward.
It's evolved to black metal, it's evolved to death metal. Look how many of those bands exist now, and without thrash metal, I don't think there would be any of those bands right now.
I know there's an underground movement that's happening, which is nice, because I think it has a big chance and a good chance to get up there and just blow out something new again.
Thrash is still there, and it's coming back in a big way, especially due to like all the new wave of Swedish thrash bands, you know.
Now it's Sweden because they, for some reason, they play guitar like, I mean, all the Swedish guitar players that I know are, most of them are good, you know. I mean, it's frightening.
The bands from Sweden, like The Haunted, Arch Enemy, you know, Carnal Forge. Yeah, bands like that.
Other bands like Do Scented that are just ripping it up.
If you look at the lineup of the bands coming out right now, it's much stronger if you look at the whole roster than it's been for a long time if you look at the metal scene, because there are so many varieties.
It's fun and it's good, and the whole thrash era was just sitting there waiting for somebody to like open up Grandpa's suitcase and find the old flipped up hat and, you know, what's this? You know, what is Daddy? What is a mosh?
I think like metal's in a terrible state, or it was in a terrible state a few years ago. Now it's like young kids are finally fed up with shitty bands, and they just want to hear the real shit.
Just in the past, I think 2 years, there have been like so many bands just popping out of the woodwork.
Bands like Municipal Waste, Bonded by Blood, Merciless Death.
There's a lot of bands that are just direct throwbacks, and there's bands that are trying to incorporate stuff like black metal and death metal into thrash, like Skeleton Witch and Arsis.
I mean, it's definitely a resurgence of thrash metal. Labels like Earache and Heavy Artillery are signing these young bands.
As long as it is from the heart, that's also, you know, it's a cliche to say that, but it's true. And it's not like bands that existed in 1988 had an exclusive license to make good thrash. There were plenty of followers and a lot of people who were just imitating what was going on around them back then. So today, I mean, when you're in the same room and the energy is undeniable, it doesn't matter. It's timeless.
I mean, if you could have predicted, you know, 20 years ago
you know, when we were sitting there fighting the man, fighting the establishment, that one day you'd have a station, you know, and you know that would be going from System of a Down into Metallica, into Godsmack, into Nirvana, into a Slipknot track, into Mudvayne, into something like Limp Bizkit, Korn. I mean, if you could have heard that 20 years ago, you would lose your lunch.
Thrash has come full circle. I mean, it started in the underground, it rose up, and it became really big and really amazing, and then there was stuff like grunge and rap metal that kind of pushed it to the back seat, but it's managed to re-emerge in bands that were influenced by those thrash bands of the 80s. Now it's not the same thrash that I used to listen to, but it's something that is more relevant to the kids that are listening to it today.
Everything changed when thrash metal came. There was nothing like it before, and there'll never be anything like it again, except for the bands that continue on doing thrash metal. It's basically our religion, you know, so whether you like it or not, just accept it, because thrash metal is still alive.
It's definitely still underground. And that's what's cool about it. The people that like it still feel like they're on an inner circle, because outside of Metallica, it wasn't a movement that just became #1 hit singles and, you know, became this massive mainstream thing.
You know, one band won bigger than the rest of us, but you know, whatever, it's cool.
The legacy of bands like Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, Slayer, they're undeniable and they'll live on forever. I mean, whether it's in the punk rock scenes, hardcore scenes, metal scenes, that stuff's there forever. It's kind of like, I honestly don't need to even go back and listen to a lot of those records because it's imprinted on my DNA at this point.
As long as there are people that are inspired by the stuff that bands like ourselves are fortunate enough to be part of, there'll always be people that take it and twist it and turn it into their own thing.
Right now, there's some kids out there in a garage somewhere, you know, who are going to be the next big metal band. And I'd like to think that what we've done in our career and what all these bands that we've talked about have done had a big influence on that.
It was just an insane time, and to be, you know, I was lucky enough for me to be there to see a lot of this stuff and see Slayer's, you know, first gigs and see Metallica's first gigs, and you know, see so many bands when they very first started and see them grow over the years. It's just, you know, we all get back and kind of look back on it and go like, how did this all happen? You know, we all just came from a bunch of kids in LA, and all of a sudden it's, you know, all this metal history happened.
Thrash metal will be around forever. When we're in our rocking chairs, we're still gonna rock back and forth and go, God, that Paul Bailoff was the best screamer ever, and that Tom Araya, and that Cliff Burton, he was the rippingest bass player. Oh, those were the greatest musicians of all time. Is that okay?
That's great. Perfect. I can see the show ending on that night.
Took a ride to NYC. Any influence that could be some from Exodus to SOG.